Hello, and welcome to episode 40? Episode 40 of KTLO, Keeping the Learning On. It is now 2021. We have left the year behind us. And is anybody sad about that?
Well, does that, because we've actually turned 21, does that make us legal now?
I think I'm not sure about this group, but
were you going there?
Yeah.
I heard someone say the other day, if you think 2020 is bad, wait till it turns 21 and starts drinking.
There you go.
Right?
There you go.
So obviously for the last two seasons, I've been ahead of the game.
That's because it's the afternoon in where you are. And we'll talk about that in a second. What's today's episode? Today's episode, as I mentioned, episode 40. And the title is The Rub and the Radiance. What's that all about, they say? Well, let's find out in a minute or two. First of all, who are these people and what are they doing on my screen? It's Patty Blackstaff, who is in the west of Canada. It is Greg Sanker, who is in the west of the USA. It is Simone, who is in the west. Where are you? The west of? You're in the southwest of France.
Southwest.
Yeah, southwest. I think the west and everything except for me. Well, no, wait. I'm in the western part of South Carolina. So we obviously have a little strange attraction for the western thing. Perhaps we'll play some cowboy songs later. If you want to get hold of any of us, this is our Twitter handles, and we have the hashtag KTLO Learn on various platforms. You can follow us all on LinkedIn if you'd care to. We hope that you do. So who are the people and why are they here? Let's find out. Here we all are. We're all here, and we actually have some people waiting to come in. And we'd like to have them join us. So one of our early guest attendees is Alfredo D'Ambrosi, who is here. So I'm going to let in Alfredo. And we have Doug Tedder, who's also a repeat performance for Greg. And we have NJ Robinson. And we have the Axeman. We have Kathy Velboom. And we have the Axeman, Akshay Anand. And here we all are. Look at that gallery of people.
Look at that gallery.
Just a plethora of... Plethora means a lot. Anyway.
You know, you look at Doug Tedder and you just think, there's a plethora.
Why use a simple word when you can use a more difficult one?
Exactly.
That's it. Exactly.
I'm pretending like I'm the Flash today. I've got
there
red and yellow going. So
I love
that makes me a plethora, I guess.
Are you doing your Sheldon thing?
What do you mean by that?
Yeah.
Don't sit in that corner of Doug's chair.
You're in my spot.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Wow.
Hi, NJ.
Boy, it's great to be back.
Hey, everyone.
NJ
Merry Christmas.
Goes under the alias of HDI capital area.
Thank you.
Do I call you
Switch
Mr.
that
Capital or Mr. Area? What do I don't know how to do that. Yeah. Okay, I'll shut up.
I call him H.
If you call him Mr. Capital, he'll sing you an area.
What happened to our other waiting room guest?
Yeah.
The Axeman is there. Oh.
Ooh, the Axeman did cometh or
Axeman
not
cometh.
Because I'm the Axeman. Yeah, I'm the Axeman. Yeah.
Wow. And we also have Todd Davis. We've got a crowd here today.
That's
Great.
Hi, Todd Davis.
That's very cool.
See, I knew I shouldn't have sent that message out.
No, you shouldn't have.
Look at all these
people
showing up.
Even Akshay came. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
What?
Actually, he's my hero because he can grow hair. I'm losing hair. He's growing hair. He's my hero.
Let's stay off that subject.
Actually, it's a new year, new haircut time.
No.
Look at that. I love it. Oh, and a guitar. Look at that.
Yes, and I picked up a small bit of kit for on Black Friday, which only came over just after Christmas, and that's this little baby here.
All right, you and I need to get on a Zoom call, and we're gonna jam. All right.
That's a really cool thing. It's called a Spark amp. It's a small practice amp.
Yep.
It's called a Spark. This is not a product endorsement on YouTube, but that's a really cool piece of kit. Because what it does is there's an app on your phone or your tablet which will emulate pedals.
Yep.
And so you can sequence pedals together to get the sound that you hear on the albums or whatever. So as you're practicing.
Okay. You guys are going to get strapped together.
This is getting easy, isn't it?
Let's get
whatever floats your boat.
Yeah.
All right. Well, here's what's going to happen next. I'm going to put us in speaker view so that as each person talks, they will be highlighted. If people will be able to see them individually, but now you've gotten to see everybody's faces. Everybody's here, and welcome to 2021 and season 3 of KTLO. So here we go into the speaker view, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we are meaning by the rub and the radiance. It's probably a little bit of an obscure title. I loved it when it was first spoken, and I believe, Patty, if I'm not mistaken, it was you who said the rub and the radiance. So the rub, what's the rub? What is the rub? Say, there's the rub. Well, the grammarist refers to the rub as a reference to the English game of bowls. And the rub is an irregularity in the surface, so that it impedes the course of the ball. And the same term is used in the game of golf. If there is a rub on the green, there's some impediment to the track of the ball. So a rub is a difficulty or an impediment. And I love an example that I found on freedictionary.com. Here's an example of use of the rub. A drawback or impediment. Example used: all you need to do to get your car back is pay the fine. But here's the rub. My wallet is in my car. Right? So there's the impediment or irregularity that prevents you from reaching the goal. So in our context today, we're going to talk about the rub being something that maybe hit our businesses like 2020. And we responded to right the ship and find some kind of a course, even if that course was different from the one we had originally charted. So how can we take that change, that solution to whatever our impediment was, and turn it into something new and radiant? So we move from rub to radiance. That's our little theme today. And I'm going to start off by putting Greg in the hot seat.
Great.
And Greg, you recently said that 2020 was IT's finest hour. Can you expand on that a little bit? Elaborate about it?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, as an industry, we made good on the promise that we've been making for a very, very long time. We've been talking about agility and resiliency and being embedded with or one with the business and changing our focus away from, things of IT or things of process and things about business outcomes. And we did that. So it in a way, 2020 was a defining moment. It was a kind of a moment of truth for us. But the question is, what are we going to do with what we learned? What we passed as customer service or customer experience in 2020 because we did what we have to do. I don't think that's going to cut it going forward. We tried things that we hadn't tried before as an industry. I know of one major retailer that in their backlog was we need to do, online order pickup off the curb in the store, but it was kind of out prioritized. Well, in 2 weeks, that organization, a major organization, was able to deliver on that. But do we know why people are doing that? Did they do that because they couldn't safely, leave their homes or exchange with other people? Is that the experience they really, really want? And for us to blast into the future and say, we know what everybody wants, the radiant solution is just pick it up at the curb. Do we know that? Do we have data that supports that? And so its finest hour was we did what needed to be done, but our finest hour lies ahead. The radiance lies ahead when we decide, what does that really mean going forward, and what do we do about that?
Well put. And just in the chat, NJ reminded us that probably the most famous use of the expression "the rub" is in Hamlet. Aye, there's the rub, in the famous "to be or not to be" speech. And I remember standing outside a couple of apartments in New York City once and looking at 2A and 2B and wondering.
God, Roy.
Anyway.
I knew you were going to do that.
Yeah, you did. Of course you did. Where there is a cheesy joke to be had, you will find me. Just if you're looking for Roy, find the cheesy joke. So I'm going to come to you, Simone, next. And when you think about the rub and the radiance, what's the first thing you think about?
Oh, well, I like NJ's reference to Hamlet. To sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. You know, we can dream as much as we like. And I know for a fact there are silver linings on clouds. It's not just a platitude. It physically exists because I photographed it. So I know they actually do exist. But I have to say that the silver linings that a lot of people talk about, they are somewhat intangible. People, you know, that radiance still requires the shadow to actually see the radiance. So my thought around it is, do we feel it instead? And I think that's where we bring in the understanding of the rub, the friction. You know, as Greg mentioned, the technology, the new toys, the things that came in, the new advantages, the abilities. So, you know, everyone notices the shiny new thing, but after a while that tarnishes. So you have to keep working it. You've got to keep it radiating its brilliance. So there's certainly the good, the bad, and the ugly about it. You know, I started my career in the grinding mill of a large beast, you'd have to call it. And it definitely shaped me. But, you know, that grinding mill, that friction, it also nearly crushed me. So there's certainly, if you like, the resilience was my rub. And, you know, what I had to keep going through, that was the rub. But it was my curiosity that was the radiance. And it was those things that really honed my skills. And I think it really helped me understand that the radiance is really more about the wisdom and finding ways to help myself and then finding ways to help my team and the organization in spite of what was going on, in spite of their changing values or focus. You know, Sharon Stone came up with a comment based on some of her experiences, which I really liked. And I don't think it's really a new thought. Many people have been through a similar thing. It's not how you fall, because that's the rub. It's actually how you get up. And to me, that's the radiance. That's when you get up with the dignity, the integrity, and the courage, and keeping your moral compass together. So I think for most people, when you're going through the rub and trying to, I guess you're going to reveal that radiance, because there will be a moment when you decide who you are, and you may or not be aware of exactly when that moment happens. And sometimes it's not until someone else points it out to you, because you were the one that made the difference to them. And that's when you were part of that friction or part of that rub that actually helped reveal someone else's radiance.
Which is a very interesting thought. I mean, we light up something which illuminates other things, including other people, right? And sometimes the rub is an internal impediment to progressing. And that's part of the story of KTLO from the beginning. It's been that personal journey of discovery and trying to figure things out as we go and try to put some of the external forces into perspective. So I'm going to jump over to Doug just for a minute because you've got to take off a little bit early, Doug. Is that true?
I do. I'm sorry, but yes.
Oh, it's no worries. It's nice to have you aboard again. So I'm just going to ask you to kind of follow up on what Greg and Simone said and just talk about how you perceived it 2020 as a rub, and it was at IT's finest hour. And actually, he's got a little question about that in the chat too, which you might want to pick up on. If you don't, I will. So
I would agree with Greg. I think, more than anything, IT got its due. I just had this conversation just the other day. I was presenting a keynote with another organization, and it's one of the things that I said is that IT finally got its due. I mean, we've been working so hard for so long, trying to establish our credibility, and gosh dang it, we're still the support organization, right? And then suddenly March happened, and in 72 hours, IT saved the business, only to be rewarded with budget cuts and furloughs, right? And and I get it. It's tough. I get it. But we saved the business, and so it was our finest hour collectively from an IT organizational perspective here. And so we overcame the rub, and back in the vernacular here, IT shined for a number of weeks, but now we're going back to a rub. So this is my perception, right? We're going to be working from home for a while longer. Newsflash. We're going to be working remotely. Our customers are working remotely. We're going to remain socially distanced. And suddenly all of that goodwill and all of that radiance that we had back in the summer is starting to fade because it is now an expectation. And now we're going back to the rub, right? Why can't you guys do all these kinds of things? Because we did it back in the summer, right? And we overcame, and people were tolerant, and people were actually being people because we were human, and we got over the technology hurdle and all of those things. But now here we are 6 or 8 months, 9 months later. Why can't you do all these things? So we never solved the problem. We continue to apply technology to the problem. Go, Greg. Go, Greg. I know you're just.
Oh my gosh, you're so right on, Doug. It's like that's the thing. It's like, in IT circles, we've been talking for years. You're not a service provider. You're part of the business. You're part and parcel with the business. But in the finest hour, the business said, no, step up, deliver, and when you're done, go away, and it's back to business as usual. If IT is viewed as, or if technology is core to what we're doing, then it's core to the business. It's not a separate organization that's cut or funded or is disparate. If we're executing on this strategy for our customers, the business that we're in, then the technology component is part and parcel with that. You don't parcel it out.
Yeah, and we fell back into the old habit, right? But we still have this great opportunity, I think, right? We as IT leaders have to take the conversation beyond the technology. It's not that we bought Slack licenses. It's not that we expanded our footprint at AWS. Great, we kept things afloat, but that wasn't it. And how do we have that conversation with the people that matter to help them understand, we're going to a whole new level here. And that's cliche, but it's true. We're going to this different place as organizations, as technologists, as business people. We're going to this different place. Will we remain working from home forever? No, we're not, because we're human. But we have this flexibility and these options that we've never had before. And most of the challenge was between here and here, right? We could always do this. But now it's thinking about a different way and doing things differently. And IT has to bridge that gap because folks outside of IT, they don't know and they don't need to know. Right. And so we've got to take ourselves to another level, and it's going to be a challenge, I think, but some of us are ready to do it, I think.
So I think we've established kind of that 2020 was this big rub, this gigantic bump in the putting surface, preventing us from getting the little white ball in the hole. So, Patty, if 2020 was taking technology and leveraging that and solving the immediate problem, getting over the rub, as it were, how does 2021 shape up from your perspective?
Well, 2020 was stabilizing. Really, it's how do we continue to do business, leverage what we have to be able to do that, pick up a few extras to be able to make sure that we're moving forward. And that was stabilizing, right? So that requires leadership presence that says, I need to throw some authority and authenticity and empathy out here for the employees to be able to let them know that they're okay. But then now we need to find security and resourcing and all of those things. But that's just the first stage of any kind of a growth model. So if you look at any of the successful folks out there, there's a 3 stages that we call our future forward growth, right? It's the stabilize, sway, and then grow. And I think right now is a really great opportunity where we look at sway, where we say, what's our current state? Now let's do this analysis and review. Let's really look at crisis activity, experimentation, testing, learning. What did we learn from this and where are we going? And this is the key opportunity here. And that's going to take leaders to shift. They have to shift their mindset from let's go back to normal, which absolutely is the wrong decision, to a growth mindset with inquiry and vulnerability and inclusionary and systems thinking, where they ask and they build on the knowledge that they've learned over this year. So that's the sway. That's where we learn to really take those cross-functional impacts, feedback, recommendations. We start looking at the experimentation and the testing, right? But then you can't stop there. That's really great. Now we've got the report. Yay us. I think that it's really important that we move past that. And so we would call that future forward. We would call that leadership that requires some strategic, visionary, communicative, action-oriented, inspiring, decisive, inviting kind of activity where we take a look at, wow, let's redo our strategic plan because the surface has shifted. Let's really take a look at those outcomes. Are they where we still need to go? You know, there's an organization in Canada where you could order quickly. They put it together where you could order groceries online, go stop in the parking lot, give them a call. They'd put the groceries in the back. And that was handy. We needed that at that time. Now we need it to work better. We need it to map up with our loyalty card properly, and we need to have the opportunity to be able to find the kinds of things we couldn't, and maybe a little bit better search. We need to take the frustration of the tool away, because now that people have been patient and they've been doing this, the world isn't changing fast enough to say normal, because that's not going to happen. But we need to take a look at what we've done as an organization to make that quick shift. That's going to involve some road mapping, organizational structure and supports have to be looked at. All of those pieces in moving forward in order to be successful. Otherwise, we're not doing any continuous improvement. We're just slapping the hands that helped us, right?
Good point. So there's one of the philosophical questions that gets explored, and heaven knows I spent way too many years studying that particular discipline, is can you have truth without falsehood? Can you have good without evil, right? It's that opposite creates its opposite. And so how do you see the relationship between the rub and the radiance, Simone? Do you see it that kind of a relationship, or is there something else going on between those two things? What do you think?
Look, I mentioned earlier, you can't see the silver lining without the shadow. To me, it's always going to be a yin yang thing. There is always one and the other, the two sides of the coin, whatever phrase, whatever kind of metaphor that you like to use. I think the short stories are really cool. NJ will get this, and any other of my military mates. If you remember when you first started in recruits, I don't know if it was just a way to occupy our time, but I think it was more than that. You had to learn how to spit polish your boots. And it takes time. And they would say, I want to see my face in that. I want to see my reflection, and over time, what happens if you've got your nice mates in your crew, they actually teach you the little tricks over time. Like, you can do the spit polish, but hey, use the lighter on it. It actually melts the polish and you get a higher shine, and I have to ask the question, and Patty brought this up, is it really cheating? Because I don't think it is. What we're doing is we're taking advantage of others' knowledge of what's gone before. And, we can still achieve the same results, but maybe we're getting faster at it. And that's what, to me, the technology does. The technology, comes faster. It's also, too, if you think of, the silver service that we expect in high-end restaurants or high-end service organizations for whatever product it might be, it takes preparation. There's no quick fix here. But perhaps, with a silver service, because of the time it needs to take, it's more easily scheduled because, we don't want to waste time polishing stuff we don't need unless it's necessary, right? It's like my Christmas dinner, okay? The silver reflects more light. It's lovely to see the glow, but that doesn't mean you're going to be doing it all the time. And I happen to have a prop with me because I know this is my Aladdin's lamp, all polished up. And someone mentioned to me, it's just a gravy boat. Oh no, it's so much more than a gravy boat. Because it depends on what I'm going to put in it and what I'm going to end up pouring out. And guess what? We get to see everything else that's going on in the reflection. But every single one of those things, whether it was the army boots or it's a silver service or it's Aladdin's lamp, and by the way, when you rub it and you get your 3 wishes, please be careful and thoughtful and accurate about what you actually wish for. Because all of this requires effort. It requires focus, dedication, but it's still that feeling of accomplishment of a job well done. And even when I was polishing those boots, it was really quite meditative after a while because you end up reflecting on the purpose. Why is this worthwhile? And it actually gives you the time to become. That's where I think that relationship between rubbing something and getting the radiance comes in.
I was going to prompt you to hold up the gravy boat when you were talking about the silver service repeatedly, because I knew you had it sitting there. And of course, coming from somewhat of a Navy household, I thought, wait, if it were bigger, would it be a gravy ship? But anyway,
I'll take a shipload of gravy over my roast any day.
And there you go. But I digress, as we said in one of our previous episodes. So, formulating a little question out of related to what Akshay put in the chat, and Akshay, we're going to come to you shortly, is the idea of radiance and the realities of corporate governance and compliance and all that whole side of things. Are they incompatible? Can you generate radiance and stay inside the lines when you color, as it were?
Are you asking me?
Yes, sir.
Are you expecting Akshay to get off? Because I actually said something actually kind of brilliant offline about lack of governance, lack of poor organizational governance. It is really kind of how we got here. I think that's a true statement, but I also don't think that it's a statement that's going to lead us into the future as IT leaders, right? So I don't think that the two are incompatible. In fact, I think that organizations that see the two as an either or, we can either be innovative and agile, or we can be compliant, etc. And it's like, they're not. It's like I gave the example the other day of, when a race car comes in for a pit stop, it's like, we don't discuss whether we put on tires and put on fuel. We discuss how much fuel do we need to get where we're going, the finish line. So having a discussion about, do we be agile and innovative in serving our customers, or do we make sure that we're doing it in a compliant, governed fashion, is basically saying, do we need fuel? No, then, somewhere before the finish line, we run out of gas and we don't make the goal, the objective. We have to master both. And that requires us to have a different model and a different understanding about how those things work, because agile organizations are those that don't forego those core minimum things that need to be done. They're the ones that get very good at doing it in the flow and don't see it as a stepwise sort of thing.
A good point. I'll put us on gallery view here so we can all see each other, and everybody else on YouTube can see the assembled group. And actually, do you want to comment a little more about what the thought that you put in the chat and what Greg just had to say about that?
Yeah, them's fighting words, Greg. So what I'd said in the chat for the benefit of the YouTube audience was I agree 2020 was IT's finest hour. We really stepped up when we needed to. A lot of people sacrificed time. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. But what I was trying to say in the chat is they shouldn't have had to do that. It's chronic underinvestment in IT over the years that led them to that place.
Yes.
And I'm agreeing too. So I don't know what we're fighting about other than how we go forward. But I'm going to let you talk because I love where you're going, actually.
What I'm trying to say is, there's a saying which you philosophers and historians, I'm sure, will recognize and correct me on, but it goes something along the lines of those who don't understand the past, those who don't understand history are doomed to repeat its failures. And one of the things that I am somewhat cynical about, it has to be said, and this could be because we're in lockdown yet again, and I've just spent the day trying to teach a 5-year-old maths. But one of the things that I am very cynical about is the fact that, well, two things, Spanish Inquisition, there are two things now. The first is strategy cycles are not changing fast enough, which means corporate governance cycles are not changing fast enough. And B, we are treating this as an elastic situation, which means we will spring back, organizations will spring back to exactly the way they were doing things before. And that cycle of underinvestment is just going to continue until the next crisis comes along. Which is why I was saying them's fighting words, Greg. I agree. This is that we have to have a positive attitude as we move forward. We need to be part of that digital leadership conversation, but at the same time, we need to be able to educate our peers in the leadership teams about why the organization found themselves where they were in 2020, and what needs to be done so that the whole company is not scrambling for survival when the next crisis hits. It might not be another pandemic, but let's face it, in 9 months here, we've seen 3 lockdowns, and there are some businesses that have gone out of business because they couldn't react fast enough. Larger organizations have just continued because they had enough cash in the bank, but those that had cash in the bank in March are now running out of cash in the bank, and now they're starting to struggle for survival. So my fervent hope is that we don't treat this as an elastic situation and go back to the way things were, and that governance truly changes to say we cannot survive without IT. We've sort of let that be part of the underlying fabric, the background of the organization. That's not true anymore. It doesn't mean that the entire organization is agile or the entire organization has to adopt DevOps or whatever the latest buzzword might be. It just means that organization has to think about doing certain things differently, and what does that need to look like? That's the radiance for me.
And that's one of the topics that we've been discussing for a long time, actually, is what does transformation mean?
Yep.
Right. Yep. And that's something I'm actually writing a book on this topic, so it's near and dear to my heart. What does transformation actually mean, and how is it different from change, and how is it different from just progressing along the same lines? But we actually did touch on your statement that organizations will fall back into their previous ways of behavior. We call it falling into default on a previous episode. So for those of you who aren't here all the time, you can go back and find that in our playlists. But Kathy, I'm going to come to you. And as you've been listening to this conversation about how the rub and the tripwires that we've fallen over and the things that have happened in our business lives this past year, how do you see it maybe being able to turn into radiance, if you have a perspective on that?
Well, of course, my perspective that I bring to these calls is always all about the people, the team that has gone through all of what they've gone through in 2020 and perhaps are even a little exhausted at this time. Did they get enough accolades for the Herculean efforts that they put in at some organizations along the way? And how do they feel right now? Are they exhausted? Do they feel the radiance of what they achieved last year? And taking into consideration the lessons that they've learned and incorporating them into the assessment that the organization and the leadership is making. Because they're the ones that have been at the front line. They're the ones that are hearing things, and that has to weave its way back into things, or you're not going to have that employee satisfaction. And we all know what happens when we don't have a high degree of employee satisfaction.
Yeah, great point. People have to understand, have to realize the mountains that they had to climb in 2020, and were successful in doing so. And NJ, 2021 Radiance, what do you think? Are we doomed to repeat the past, or can we move on and turn it into something shinier? And then Todd, I'm going to come to you after NJ.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, from a leadership perspective, I disagree. I totally agree with everyone else before. IT really shined. And I really like Patty. She talked about the stabilization. This year was a lot of stabilization. And then the question next year is going to be, how do we grow? And maybe trying to bring all these different concepts, these ideas about governance and strategy and growth together. For me, we looked at what were the objectives and the strategic goals of an organization, and how did IT fit into that? And before the pandemic, there wasn't, from our perspective, wasn't not much of a viewpoint on, hey, we need to leverage all these different technological capabilities to enable remote working, for example. Well, all of a sudden things happened and we had to struggle, and we had to fix it. We had to come up and be creative. Similar to one of our past discussions around change and how organizations change under dramatic stress a lot of times. And so we saw that happen. And so the challenge is going to be that we've had this great win from a technical perspective, but when we return to normal, does that mean a return to status quo? And how do we continue the momentum of leveraging technology in a new environment when we normalize? So those are the things I'm really much with Patty. Like, yeah, we did great, I think, but the Radiance, I think maybe it was great. The Radiance is to come. We're in the middle of that spectrum right now.
Todd, what's your perspective on where we're headed here, and how are we progressing toward that Radiance, or are we doomed to repeat?
Well, I appreciate you bringing up a theme earlier. There is a version of the creation story, opposition in all things, where Eve was the one to articulate clearly that we cannot appreciate the sweet without the bitter. And there is the rub. What if this is the new normal? And there is no bouncing back for a lot of organizations. You've got to take that into very serious consideration. And so as we try to push forward, as Eve in that story did, we need to choose. Are we going to choose the light? And good governance is often about putting it back to the team so that you proactively, not reactively, to the rub, choose the light and use what you have around you. I know for us, this lockdown has required us to choose new ways to bond and combine and relate. Having the camera on in our meetings almost becomes mandatory, not as a dictatorial kind of thing, but as a human thing, so that we can push the light forward, so that we can continually choose the light as teams, as leaders.
And speaking of your analogy earlier, if I may, and talking about the light, let's not forget that the Latin word for he who carries light is Lucifer. So,
yes.
And that, my friends, is a very interesting little linguistic twist, isn't it?
Yes.
So we're going to ease on down the road here, and we're going to resume the conversation, and I'm going to put us back in the speaker view so that we highlight whoever is articulating their particular point of view. And I'm going to come back to you, Patty. And so something hits our business, and we've talked about that. We hit the rub. It deflects our trajectory. We respond. Perhaps we heroically respond, as Greg says, as IT's finest hour and so forth. But that response is a solution to deal with that particular thing. So is getting to the radiance, is that a question of broadening the picture out so that we're looking at the big picture? What can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. If we're not using this as a means of transforming, we're failing the opportunity, right? We're failing it completely. We have to look at our systems. We have to take a really good look at this whole system, the policies that are applied, how we're looking at delivery, what we actually do, and what those outcomes should be. And if they haven't shifted, you're not doing your homework, as far as I'm concerned. There is a lot behind trying to understand. So the radiance isn't just let's solve this how, like Doug said, in he kind of noted that in a chat before he left. The radiance is, how do we now delight? How do we now make this something that is better for our customers, better for our employees, and actually works for the business? And is our strategy, we talked in earlier episodes, is our truth still true? And delight, I don't mean, delight doesn't mean novelty. Let's not say, oh, wow, here's this cool new technology. We can look better to people. This is really about serving better. This is about, are we efficiently serving better? And I don't mean efficiency by lower cost, but efficiency by proficiency and competency. Are we serving better now, or can we leverage what we've learned to serve better? And that's internally and externally. And honestly, we've still got organizations, big ones, who just prior to this, just a few years prior to this, pulled all their work from home people away. IBM did it, a number of different large organizations, without the foresight of what was coming. We've been pushing for years. Everyone on this call has been pushing organizations for years to say, hey, look at the acceleration. We humans and all of our policies and all of our structures aren't moving fast enough in order to really leverage the technology that's coming. Stop focusing solely on the technology, the hype, the what the vendor's selling you, features, because none of that's going to work well for you if you don't pay attention to the people in the system and how that's leveraging it to get to your outcomes. And so I think that's the shift. I think that's where we need to really take a look at it. And I'm paraphrasing you, Akshay, because I really loved, if your business needed heroic efforts for your IT strategy, then your business is underfunded. That's gold today. I think that's Twitter worthy. Is your business foundation actually IT, or are you looking at them as those guys in that back room? If your world was a well-oiled machine before, you're not doing your homework. You are actually stagnating. You're not in growth. And so I think radiance means, who are we? How can we get better? And what do we have to change to do that? And that's interdepartmentally and that's systemically, as far as I'm concerned.
Came perilously close there to quoting one of my heroes, Mario Andretti, who said, if you feel like you're in control, you're not going fast enough. Right? Just hanging on the edge. Simone, your bailiwick is humanizing IT and talking about the relationship between humans and technology. So what's the human message here in getting from where we are to where we need to be?
Okay. So, if my maths grades had have been better and a few other things and other stars had aligned, I might have found myself in astrophysics or a field like that. I am completely fascinated when I think about radiance. All of light is invisible. And combine that then with philosophy, etc. The illumination is really just an illusion. It's really just a reflection of reality, what we perceive and we make our own. A few years ago, I wrote an article, and I'm going to revive and update it because it's really about what we say about being illuminated by brilliance. One should never be blinded by brilliance, only illuminated. Because if you lose your sight, then it wasn't brilliant. It was just a flash in the pan and it just burns and fades. So in other words, don't try to copy your mentors, don't try to copy your heroes, etc. You can learn their tricks and their techniques, but you need to adapt them to your own style. It's been mentioned before, the trajectory that we're on. Our orbit has shifted. A lot of us have been completely knocked off our axis from whatever meteors came at us during the last 12 months. And, our surface is so pitted, but it's created a new pattern. So we need to be and remain more fluid in the way we're going to approach our changes beyond what we call digital transformation, because we have to now go through the acceleration of what's going on. For me, I think maybe it's more about unbecoming, not being unbecoming, but unbecoming. Because everything that isn't really you anymore. So you can actually be who you were meant to be in the first place. Maybe the rubbing away and discovering who you are now, because we're in a different context. In that rub, we really reveal what we see, our own eyes reflected back to us. And it's only when we turn that object of the light at an angle. It's like going to the funny mirrors at the sideshow in the circus, we start to see ourselves in a different form and can imagine a different path. And I think the final part of that to me is asking the key questions. The rub is really having the courage to accept the answers where we need to change when we ask the question, the courage to accept the answers and then be adaptable and keep exploring. The curiosity thing for me, that is a continuous way of rubbing away and revealing the radiance, because that's one of our greatest assets when it comes to understanding and moving forward on our journey.
Cool. Thank you very much. And Todd says that's referring back to Heidegger. I actually studied with George Pepper, who was a student of Heidegger. So,
fantastic. Cool. I know George. Yeah. Great guy.
Do you? Wow.
I did.
Cool.
I studied Levinas as an undergrad.
Well, see that?
Who studied Heidegger, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you mean I did all of that without having done the study?
Yeah. Did very well.
It was
with
experiential study.
Truth is truth. Yeah.
Truth is truth.
So this is a very interesting topic and a great discussion today. Absolutely stunning. So radiance, or whatever the future is. I mean, let's talk a little bit about, do we need to get to radiance, or do we find ourselves at a new level of rub? I mean, there's always going to be a rub, right? And it's one of my favorite topics when I talk about customer relationships, when I talk about employee engagement, when I talk about technology, when I talk about improvement. There's always a rub. There's always friction, and friction can generate positivity, as we said before. Maybe sometimes things produce their opposites. But is radiance the goal? However we define that radiance, so we're calling it radiance for the purposes of this discussion. Do we need to be the brightest bulb on the tree, or is it good enough to illuminate what's around us? Who's going to put their hand up for that one? Oh, look at all those hands go up. Let's start with you, Patty, and then we'll go to Greg and bounce around a little bit.
Well, the first thing is, if you're trying to be the lightest or the brightest bulb on the tree, you're already setting yourself backwards, because you're not paying attention to what you do. You're paying attention to what others are doing. I think we need to aspire to be adaptable enough to say, are we serving well? And are we flexible enough to change so that we can accommodate what's coming at us? So what are the foundations for that? And Radiance is, what do we have to always have in place? I really think that this is not going to be the only big thing that hits businesses. I think we're going to see more and more change hitting us in ways that is unexpected. And that adaptability is going to have to be moving through the entire organization. Is the organization agile enough? Are the leaders wise enough to understand the effort involved and who's required? Are we strategic enough to understand that strategy isn't something you do once a year and shove in a drawer so that you say you look great? Strategy is something you're doing on a continual basis in a plan. And otherwise, we'll never get to continuous improvement. We'll never get to continuous growth. Radiance shouldn't be a goal. It should be an ongoing aspiration that's adaptable to the organization, the environment it's in. That's my 2 cents.
So what you're saying basically is, when we enter a room, we should say, bathe in my radiance. No, it's not what you're saying.
Not really.
It just felt good to do that. That was my little shtick for today. Okay. I'm over it now.
So I'm actually missing all that spa treatment type stuff where I can actually imagine being bathed in radiance, the rest in the repair mode.
Yeah.
When Roy said the topic of this week's KTLO was the rub and the radiance, I thought, are we talking about spa facials or something?
I wish
we could all use one.
That's what Simone had in mind. Yes.
Me too. I'm missing that.
This is the trouble with living inside of my brain, is that when you say spa, I don't think of being lavishly treated. I think of a turn called Eau Rouge, which is a right-hand uphill turn, which is exceedingly fun and dangerous at Spa in Belgium. So this is just how my brain works. I'm sorry. I can't help it. So
do we have
NJ,
a comment, or are we wrapping up?
Oh, that's fine. We've got time for you to have a comment, and then we'll go to Kathy, whose hand has been.
I just wanted to support what Patty was saying. I thought it was absolutely spot on. And I'd like to back that up with a completely random example. My wife and I have been binging on Ted Lasso for the last 3 days. And there's a really nice scene where he talks about his philosophy as a coach. And he says, his aim, I'm paraphrasing, it goes something like, his aim is not about how many wins versus losses he has. His aim is to make every player in the field the best person they can be.
Yeah.
And I think that's the philosophy we now need in this very, I know this is a very stereotypical VUCA environment, but with the amount of volatility and uncertainty and so on, we need to be able to coach and develop people to the best they can be, not what we think or we want them to be. Because by building that level of diversity of thought, of thinking, of action, that's how we achieve resilience. That's how we are able to react better to the next shock to the system.
And there is no magic wand. It takes work. There's no 3 steps to greatness. There's no magic wand.
No. And you know what, actually, interestingly with that is that those things that we've talked about, helping people become the best they can be, and combining that so, the sum of all parts is greater, all that kind of thing. That's not a new philosophy, but I think what's happened, it's become more clear, or I guess sharper in people's minds now because of what we've been through, this referring back to another episode, this kind of crucible that's occurred. And I think we need, as Patty's been saying before, and Greg and Roy, and what we've talked about in other episodes, it's about being that way on a consistent basis now, so that we can make those shifts and turns, and that we can help people make those shifts and turns along with it.
Kathy,
Yes.
you've been bursting, and we're talking about
I
people
know.
stuff, which is your bailiwick.
Well, and
so.
that's when I start to, yes, absolutely. And I want to go back to first what Simone had said on past episodes about rest and restore. And I think that needs to be taken into consideration, perhaps for the teams that were stretched so far to their breaking point. They may need that time. And it's important as leaders to understand where the energy level of our team is, so that they don't fade out and burn out and fade away from the organization, perhaps. But the other thing to Akshay, I always say it wrong. Akshay, I'm just probably Oscar.
Somebody once called me Ashley, so you're much better than that. Don't worry.
There you go. But you talked about developing players to be the best they can be, right? I also think about a question that we often asked our son, if we weren't maybe at a basketball game or something, how many assists did you make? Were you part of that team? Because that's important too, is if these teams got to that point, is there fragility within the team? And then I wanted to go back to what Patty said in talking about, or brought up about, being the brightest bulb on the tree. It's also to remember that we need, beyond the brightest bulb, is to consider people that maybe are twinkling lights, are lights that change color, are lights that are just that consistent soft glow. Because we can't always have the radiance. We want to speak to that so that when we look at that tree, we see the awe, but we also see the beauty of everything else within the tree that's going on.
Shadow,
and I think that's the team when I'm thinking about the team right now.
Oh, and by the way, who's supplying the electricity to the bulb?
The leader.
Should be.
It should be.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Cool. Wow. What a great discussion today. Really, really thoughtful and introspective and retrospective and perspective, every spective there is, I should say. And we are moving onward. For next week, we'll be back, and we'd like to thank all our guests and returning folks here today. The core four, of course, as you know, Patty Blackstaff, thank you for waving, Simone, Joe Moore, and Greg Sanker, and myself, and our people today, NJ Robinson, Kathy Velboom, Akshay Anand, Todd Davis, and Alfredo's been lurking in the background. He always listens in. It's always nice to have you there listening with us, Alfredo. And although it sounds like he should be in Rome, he's actually about 10 miles away from me, so here in South Carolina. But it's a beautiful thing to say, Alfredo de Brosi. It's a wonderful thing. And we thank you for joining us, and we will be back shortly with another episode of KTLO, keeping the learning
They're learning on.
We don't know which way we're pointing, but